Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we have reached number 5 in our list of nations that I believe are pretty good in terms of options in second edition. And I'm not going to lie, I'm very excited to be on this week's recording because it is the nation I started with. It is the first one I jumped into, the girl that I have brought, so to speak, to so many tournaments. And I liked dancing with this one, and that is Poland. For those of you who have talked with me at all on the Facebook group, you know that Poland is my favorite. Poland is the one that I started with, and Poland is the one I tend to think of most problems with when I first encounter something, some build that somebody's presenting or some list that's being presented. I am not here to say that Poland is one of the strongest armies in the game. I do think it is very asymmetric, and it is quite powerful for what it is designed to do, as you will see as we go through. But to start off with, we almost start with a bit of a downer because the Army special rules for Poland are not very good. They're not particularly horrible. They just most of them just never come up. That's the biggest thing about it. So, communications breakdown, we've talked about this several times. If your dice is the first one drawn on turn 1, so roughly half the time, more or less, it's probably not going to come up at all, assuming that you have a competitive order die count and your opponent has a competitive order die count. It's not really going to come up in half the games you play. And even in as much as it does come up, your opponent then gets a choice, so they don't have to, throw your dice back into the bag and redraw, which means 3 things. Number 1, if your opponent is going more of a defensive build where he wants you to make the first move, he might just let it slide, at which point your special rule hasn't come up yet. Secondly, if you're throwing the dice back into the bag, the odds of redrawing one of your dice hasn't actually changed. And because that's the case, you might still end up getting the first draw. And the third thing is, some people are just gonna not invoke this one and just keep moving because in their mind it doesn't really matter, right? They don't want to have to think through and work through, do I put the dice back in, do I not? They're saving their mental energy for something else, which means they might just move along. And I've definitely seen that happen sometimes too, because they want to get into the game. So toward that end, communication breakdown is kind of a null. Nothing really happens there because all that this does is slow down the beginning of the game. That's all it does. The second rule is fantastic. No hope of retreat means that you get to reroll failed morale tests, period. It's not just infantry and artillery like it is for some armies. If you fail a morale test with anything at all, you get a reroll. That is fantastic for in case you suddenly take a whole large number of casualties. It's very useful against flamethrowers because now you get 2 chances to try to pass a flamethrower test instead of 1. So toward that end, really good special rule. And then finally, elite officer class, your officers gain fanatics. Now, we talked about this a little bit with Hungary because Hungary has a similar rule in second edition. This is not a good special rule, not because it hurts you, because Fanatics is hypothetically really good. The reason why it's a bad special rule is because it doesn't really come up in second edition. In first edition, it might have come up a whole lot more, which is where both of these armies got those rules. But in second edition, since Fanatics only applies when you have 2 or more men, and you don't generally take a morale test to see if you're going to disappear unless you lose half or more of the unit, on a 3-man squad, the only situation where this would come up is if you were attacked by a flamethrower, it hits, it rolls for it how many hits it does, wounds with none of them, and then forces a morale test, at which point you would pass because Fanatics. The only other situation where it technically comes up is if a whole bunch of enemies were to be shooting at this unit and it were to suffer a number of pins equal to or greater than its morale value. As long as it has 2 or more guys, they don't run. I can tell you from a lot of experience in second edition, this doesn't happen. Okay, you'd have to be hit by an awful lot of stuff, and they would have to roll particularly badly in order for you to somehow magically end up with 8, 9, 10 pins and still have 2 or more guys in that squad. Realistically, it's not going to happen. So on the whole, you have 1 really good one and 2 that basically never come up or at least don't do particularly much against you. So on the whole, not a bad start, but could be better. In terms of headquarters, I hate to end it on such a bland note with these guys, but this also doesn't have much to talk about. You get all the officer options, you get all of the forward observer options, you get the medic only at veteran, which is unfortunate because You know, if you could save yourself 7 points by taking a medic regular, that could be really nice. But they don't get access to a regular one here in second edition. No specialized officers means we move into infantry. And here in the infantry section is where Poland tends to live and thrive. Okay. Your inexperienced squads are average. You get some that are really small, mostly tied to theater selector lists. More about that a little bit later. But the core one that you get is an inexperienced rifle section that starts at 10 men. And then it goes up to 19 men, which is very large on both ends of the extreme. This means, on the one hand, you don't have a lot of cheap infantry available to you across all theater selectors and the reinforced platoon. However, if you were going to buy inexperienced troops, which I wouldn't with Poland, having access to a durable one that would require the enemy to roll quite a few wounds in order to remove it, and then having a reroll on the morale test to avoid being removed, and then having access to a BAR instead of an LMG already puts it above most other armies' inexperienced squads. This one could actually take and hold an objective for you, especially if you're willing to just run it up onto an objective and then go down every single turn. It could actually do the job. And with the BAR, you're getting a decent bit of firepower, a good bit better firepower than you get with an LMG coming off of this unit. So if you needed it to do supporting fire for you, it's actually not that bad. 75 points for 11 shots, admittedly with a -1 to hit, is really not that bad, all things considered. In terms of your regulars, these are fantastic. These are anywhere from 5 to 19 men, depending on whether you're taking 10th Motorized Infantry or Standard Infantry. They get access to the BAR instead of the LMG, which means you get some of the best supporting fire in the game. You can't stack the BARs like you can with the US. More on the Americans a little bit later in our series. But in general, this is not bad in terms of firepower. You tended to not see a lot of people run just regular dismounted infantry for reasons that we'll talk about when we talk about specialists. But if you're looking just for guys who can sit on an objective, this is a good way to do it. Similarly, you have veteran versions of the 10th Motorized Infantry, so it's 5 to 10 men with a BAR. And hey, if you need somebody to hold an objective for you, veterans are hard to remove, and they can do decent firepower from long range, so they're really not that bad. But of course, where most people tend to live with Poland, and the one that has won me the most, including this trophy right here, and if I can find which way to move on my camera, this first place win over here, it's cavalry, right? And that makes sense. It's the one that Poland is most well known for. Their Ulan regiments were quite plentiful throughout the war, admittedly not so much running over people with lances, but, you know, they were quite prevalent, mostly because of the fact that Poland had a lot of ground to cover, and they were not fully mechanized yet, so they had to rely on horsemen getting to places that they needed to go in order to defend the ground. You'll find that these come in regular and veteran. Both of those have their advantages and disadvantages. And they can take lances, and lances are really the reason why people tend to play cavalry with Poland. These are traditional standard horsemen, so, you know, they get the carbines that can shoot within 6 inches. But if you take the lances, you can just forego any of the shooting while you're on horseback, pay an extra point per man, and instead add a second attack to all of your guys. And of course, those second attacks all trigger tough fighters. So you could end up with even a 6-man veteran section. If they can all get in there with all of their dudes, that's 12 dice that you're rolling. And then that would give you, even against veterans, about 4 wounds. Pick up another 4 dice and sneak in 1, maybe 2 more. If you're removing 5 veterans when you're charging into people, 6 veterans when you're charging into people, there's a very good chance that that fight is over. There's no way that they're going to be able to beat you in terms of actual wounds. Now, obviously, there are hard counters to this, the Nepalese Gurkha being a really good example of this from the British list, because they have the number of attacks. But let's be honest, if you're going to have your number of attacks halved, it's always nice when all of your guys are starting with 2. Right? Because then at least you are rolling at least 1 for every guy you have in the unit. And then even then, if you're only rolling for 6 veterans against the Gurkhas, you're still going to remove 2 or 3 of them before they swing. Right? Which is quite nice in this one, because that means they would have to hit with pretty much everybody in order to try to beat you, and still have to hit with pretty much everybody in order to try to tie you. And that's not horrible. So in general, I think it works really well. But of course, where most people went, if they were going for lances and they really wanted to do removal, they didn't go with 6 veterans. They were going with like 8 or 9 regulars. The reason being is that they hit just as hard as the veterans. You just make sure you can keep them safe. And then after that point, once the lances are into the guys, I mean, 16 to 18 dice, even against veterans, that's like 6 wounds before tough fighters. It's like 8 wounds after tough fighters, which is a lot, right? In most cases, the enemy won't even be able to attack you back. And sure enough, in the 2 matches, well, the 6 matches total that I had over here with just these 2 tournaments, I think I got swung back on twice, even though I was running between 3 and 5 cavalry sections in each of those tournaments. So, like you can get quite a bit of value out of them. And with the 2d6-inch overrun, you can pretty easily get to some level of cover afterwards, and really begin threatening the back line to start quickly removing units after you break through. So on its face, Polish cavalry are top 3. I think it's safe to say for assault infantry in general in second edition. The Italian Savoia Cavalleria are really good because they get 2 charges potentially in a given turn, and of course the Nepalese Gurkhas are really good because whether they're charging or being charged, they're very, very effective at making sure that you will win the fight. But I think it's at least fair to say top 3. You do also get access to a couple of theater selector units. Okay, so we'll talk about them here. This is mostly from the Polish postal units that they get from the Germany Strikes book. There's really not much special here. The big benefit that you get is that you can take like 3 to 5 man squads. So if you wanted to do like an MSU style build, the postal unit theater selector is fantastic for that because you get an awful lot of tiny squads that you can run for relatively cheap, and a number of those can take submachine guns on every single man. So if you like running small hit squads of lots of burst shooting and tough fighters on everybody, you do technically get that. Personally, I would pass on all of that to get the cavalry and all the benefits that come from not rolling the postal units theater selector, but technically you do get those, and they are not horrible. For machine gun teams, they're actually slightly better than average. You not only get the machine gun team that everybody normally got, the medium machine gun. In the theater selector for the postal units, they get a 2-man light machine gun team for 40 points regular, which is really good because while Germany got like a 35-point light machine gun team, it had 3 men, which means you didn't get the small team penalty to your opponents to hit. But this one is only a 2-man section, so now every opponent is at least -1 to hit, very possibly another -1 to hit for this unit being in cover because you're not going to be dumb running a machine gun team into the middle of nowhere to shoot at people. So at least another -1 to hit from there. That's already 5s, maybe 6s if it's heavy cover. If they're at long range at that point, you're looking at 6s or worse. And then there's pins, right? So like the chances that you're actually able to hit this thing is actually quite low. It's quite survivable. It's still firing those 4 shots. It's also the only access that Poland gets to light machine guns. And if you're going to get access to light machine guns, this is the way to do it. Arguably getting 1 shot less with 1 less wound for 10 less points and a harder difficulty to hit, I think this LMG team is dramatically better than the medium machine gun team that you had access to in all of your other lists. So on the whole, not bad. Your mortar teams are great because you get access to medium mortars, which are fantastic. Not excellent because you don't get access to heavy mortars, but you do get access to those, which is great. Your anti-tank teams are really good because you get access to AT rifles, which are great ways of dealing pins. Poland, like many of the early war allied nations, does have an issue in the anti-tank realm. But if you're going to have issues with tank removal, at least you can try doing pins to set you up for your other tools that can actually try to do removal. Your sniper teams are actually good, not just average, because yes, you do get access to the sniper 2-man team, but you also get access to the dramatically cheaper, about 10 to 15 points cheaper, Polish marksman. And the marksman is just a sniper that's only a 1-man squad instead of a 2-man squad. And on the one hand, it means, yeah, if he gets shot at and he gets wounded, you can't just take the assistant. So he's more likely to just be removed entirely. At the same time, he's not nearly as much of a target because of how Poland runs, as you'll soon see. He's cheaper, so you can afford more of the stuff that you really need in order to make sure you've got diversity of threats, that people aren't really shooting at your sniper. 3, he could always go down if you really need him to, just to help keep him alive, and then let the enemy shoot at him if they really want to, make them waste some shots. And finally, if you're just looking for a sniper to do removal on things like flamethrowers or Panzerfaust or something else like that, I mean, this is the most budget way you're going to do it without having to take something inexperienced, which is fantastic. So on the whole, really good. You don't get access to any flamethrower teams. You do get access to a VB launcher team in the Postal Units Theater Selector. I'm not a big fan of light mortars. I'm not a big fan of VB launchers. But if you're going to have access to a specialized team, I mean, hey, why not? Right? Why not have access to a VB launcher? The 6-inch minimum range means that you can hit all kinds of people with this thing. It's pretty reliable, all things considered, for being a light mortar style weapon. right? It's a lot harder to get in under the gun, so to speak, against this thing. And if they do try to get within your close range, you can always charge them with this unit, and then they can't even react to you, right? So like, there's options here. I don't think they're particularly great options. Not a good reason to run the postal units that are Selector, but there it is. And then for artillery, you get all the kinds of howitzers, which is great. And honestly, that's where I would probably live in most cases, just because it's going to be your best penetration, even especially at long range. For AT guns, you only get access to the light AT gun, which on the whole means less traps, which is what we're measuring in this assessment. On the other hand, I don't see a lot of reason to run an AT gun over and against your anti-aircraft guns and your howitzers. For the anti-aircraft guns, you get access to light and heavy AA guns. So, you get access to the WZ-34, if I'm not mistaken, for the Polish light autocannons, just a single light autocannon. Or you get access to the Bofors, and the Bofors is awesome. It looks awesome. It plays awesome. It does really well. It helped win me this tournament. So, on the whole, is pretty good. You don't get access to any rocket launchers, but then again, most of these early war armies didn't have them in the first place. So on the whole, I would live in the howitzers and AA gun category. And then for your tanks, they are fine. You get access to the Vickers E6 and the Polish 7TP, which is just the Vickers E6 with more vulnerable but thicker armor. So, they're exactly the same, either a light AT gun with a coaxial machine gun or two medium machine gun turrets. So they're independent. You can fire at two different units, and they have a full 360 view, even though I think the physical versions of these didn't actually have 360. It was like 270. They can't actually fire in the opposite direction. But that is not how it's worded in bolt action. So here we are. These are great. They're really good. Depends. Do you want damage value 7 for slightly cheaper? Do you want damage value 8 for slightly more expensive? But you're treated as damage value 7 effectively from the sides and from the rear. All depends in terms of what you want. You do get access to some Renault tanks as well. So you get access to the Renault FT17. You get access to, some of the later Renaults. Honestly, I'd probably just pass on the French tanks. I don't think they're particularly worth it. I think you either go for pin generation and infantry removal, in which case the Vickers and the 7TP work just fine, or you're going for some light AT gun tank dueling against light armor, in which case the Vickers E6 and the 7TP do just fine. And I think that would work out better. You don't really get any tank destroyers. You don't get any self-propelled guns. You don't get any anti-aircraft platforms. In the realm of special vehicles, however, you do get trains. And I'm not going to lie, I love trains. I think trains are cool. I can see trains every day when I go home from work. There's a train stop that even passes through my house. I like trains. And the Polish trains are awesome, not only because you can get very, very cheap, read like 10, 15 point transport for like 12 dudes. Admittedly, stuck on a train track. So like your enemy knows exactly where it's coming from. So there's that. But, it's super cheap transport. You get access to the Polish gun truck, which starts with 8 machine guns, 4 facing out to either side. You get access to, it starts with 2 light howitzers, and you can upgrade those to medium howitzers, and those are both on turrets. I mean, that's a lot of firepower, admittedly, for like, the cost of a big Sherman. Okay. It's not like you're not paying a lot of points, but I mean, it's on par with like an M3 Lee. The M3 Lee was really good in second edition. And, for the same cost of an M3 Lee, you get 8 machine guns and 2 medium howitzers. And the only trade-off is that you can't move on if the train armored like engine gets disabled and people know exactly where you're coming from. Like, it could be a whole lot worse. It really could be. This is actually really good. And having played with trains in a couple of casual games, because I didn't have the heart to tell our local tournament organizer, hey, what are your rules about trains? Because that just feels like extra work that I don't want him to have to do. So we're not going to. I think trains are awesome, and I think they're worth looking into and playing with. You can find some files from Dewey Cat Productions, by the way, for both the train, like just tracks for you to put down on your board, which is awesome, but also some files for trains. You go check them out. If editor Aaron remembers, he'll throw it down in the doobly-doo below. But where most people tend to live when it comes to armored vehicles for Poland is the armored car selection, because all of these are really good. Your tankettes are exceptional. They are very small. They have the option of either really cheap with a machine gun or slightly more expensive with a light autocannon, which is fantastic. And I would just take the light autocannon every single time, especially in second edition when you can only take one. And then you've also got access to armored cars, which are not horrible either. You get access to the Ursus, which is just a bunch of machine guns, basically. You get access to the WZ-34, which is, it starts off with a machine gun fully on a turret. It can be either half-tracked or wheeled, which is kind of awesome. Or you can replace the gun with a low velocity AT gun if you prefer one of those. I would probably pass on the low velocity AT gun. I don't really rate low velocity AT guns very high, but you could if you wanted to. And then you have the Tashanka, and the Tashanka is literally just a horse-drawn carriage with a machine gun pointing out the back. Now, I have a little note here on the Tashanka. The Soviet Union also gets the Tashanka. But the Tashanka, for reasons that I don't understand for the Soviet list, appears in the tank slot. And that just doesn't make sense to me. I feel like it's a way closer to an armored car than it is to a tank. And my confusion is heightened by the fact that I collected the army book for Poland first. So in my mind, Tashanka, look it up online. You see what it is, and you're like, oh yeah, totally counts as an armored car. Closest you're going to get for an armored car. And then you're reading the Soviet book, and you read that it's in the tank slot, and it just didn't make any sense. So personally, change I would recommend, drop it here. Obviously in 3rd edition, doesn't matter because everything's just in the armored platoon, right? So there's that. But on the whole, I think the Polish book gets it right. And then looking at tows and transports, your soft transports are really great, actually. You not only get access to a number of the, commonly available wheeled options for soft transports, you also have a half-track option, which is kind of cool. So if you want a little more versatility and maneuverability, you can do that. You also get access to a really good armored carrier. Now, got a caveat, because this is something people like to complain about. They get an armored damaged IU-7 plus half-track that can be completely buttoned up, which is fantastic, and it's super cheap because it doesn't have any guns on it. And so because of that, it is like, it's cheaper than a Bren carrier, carry as many or more men as a Bren carrier. It's fantastic. Problem. Historically, I at least have not seen any pictures of it actually enclosed. I've seen an open-topped version of what I think is supposed to be this half-track, because it doesn't have a serial number or any sort of designation. It just says, half-tracked transport, right? And so because of that, we don't know exactly what it is, but at least from all the stuff I've seen, I've never seen one fully buttoned up. So if you're still playing 2nd edition and you got, say, like a 5-man veteran section with a BAR that you want to just drop onto objectives and you want to wheel them up nice and safe, this is a great way to do it. If you're playing in 3rd edition, as you'll soon see, they've slightly fixed this. So that's great. But on whole, just know, even with the erratas going right up until the end of the edition, this was not errata in the Armies of France and the Allies book. Okay, so for 2nd edition purposes, you have a really good armored carrier. In terms of gun transports, they're fantastic because you can take trucks with machine guns on them, which worked really, really well in 2nd edition. And then finally, you've got your tows, which are great, mostly because you get horse-drawn limbers, and you don't get any guns on your tows, but again, who does? Not many. And so when we look at your best choices, cavalry all the way for infantry, you can take others. But in general, your cavalry are just where you're really going to land and what's going to work really well for you. Your mortars are great. Your AT rifles are great. Your marksman's great. Your howitzers or your Bofors AA gun is probably what I would go for. The 10-point upgrade from a light autocannon to a heavy autocannon is fantastically good value. So if you were looking at taking a light autocannon for 50 points regular, bump it up to 60 points and just take the Bofors. You get access to the 7 TP or the Vickers E6. That's where I would go in the tank slot. You take the TKS Tankette, specifically with the light autocannon in the armored car slot. And then maybe you take some MMG trucks. Maybe you take an armored tractor or something like that just for cover. Your armored tractors are relatively cheap, which is good. You can take those in experience, especially if you've got an officer that's going to be hanging out right behind them. And you can just move it up and turn it. You see this in our cover transports theory video that we released a little while ago. It can work really, really well. In the tournament over here, Operation Valediction, that I went to, I brought 2 machine gun heavy trucks. And they did really good work for supporting fire to make sure that people had pins before they were trying to shoot at cavalry coming in at them. And that helped an awful lot. So in terms of sample list, what would I do? I would do a 2nd lieutenant with an extra furtherman on a horse purchased regular. One of the reasons why I would consider purchasing this regular, even though it is way more expensive than taking this inexperienced, you're losing almost 20 points doing this, is because if you want to be able to make charges, since you can't take lances on these guys, you need to not be removed in return. And so this guy is going to be able to move up with the rest of the cavalry to make sure that they're getting that morale bonus. He can snap somebody if he really wants to, which is fine. And there are reasons why you would do that. But the big reason why we're doing this is so that he can, 1, provide the morale bonus where it needs to be to help make sure that the cavalry keep going and do their thing and don't run off from being panicked, which is important. But the second reason why you would want him is that you don't want to have to run over something like a light mortar team. with a cavalry unit that you paid serious points for, right? I mean, each of these is about 100 points. So toward that end, having a little two-man regular unit that can rush in there with tough fighters, take out a unit, possibly in the case of light mortar team, both of them before they even get to strike back. And even if they do try to strike back, there's a very good chance that you're still going to win because you're regular instead of being inexperienced. So, that's what you want this guy for. It's small chaff clearing units. If the enemy has a one-man team still left or one lone rifleman holding on, that's what this guy's for. Okay. The next 5 cavalry sections are for running over serious stuff, right? It's for getting rid of enemy infantry sections. It's taking out artillery teams, machine gun teams, anybody who might try to reactive fire and could really mess up the lieutenant squad. This is what these guys are for. We'll take a medium mortar team in experience because that's how I liked running them. We'll take a marksman veteran because I had 10 points and I didn't know what else to do with it. So I just put it there. We'll take an AT rifle team regular. We'll include a heavy howitzer with a spotter so we can get +4 penetration at any range up to 72 inches away, possibly even further if we had to shoot it long, indirect, which is great. Mostly we're using this as a means of actually trying to, pin down and nail down enemy armor, with the biggest advantage of this being, even if it just hits and doesn't actually do any damage to it, D6 pins is a lot. On average, the next turn, they're going to be doing a rally order, right? And it's possible, depending on how they roll on rallies, they may not even remove all the pins with that. So on the whole, howitzer, that's what I would go with. And then we're going to take the C2P artillery tractor. This is a nice artillery tractor, a relatively budget artillery tractor that will give us some mobile cover that we can put in front of our cavalry. And then we're going to take a TKS tankette with a light autocannon, take that regular, and then we're going to take a 7TP tank with 2 machine gun turrets at regular, giving us a nice round 13 order dice at 1,000 points. Not like the greatest way to optimize, mostly because you could drop the heavy howitzer, you could take an autocannon, and then once you take the autocannon, you can afford to fit in like a machine gun truck, maybe drop the veterancy on the marksman, and maybe take even something else, maybe like a small, cheap civilian car, so that way you can also provide a little bit of extra mobile cover for some of your cavalry. So you can get the order dice count closer to like 15 or even 16 at this, but I think this 13 is a nice rounded thing that actually has some interesting synergies going with it between supporting fire and aggressive forward play. So what does Poland look like in 3rd edition? Honestly, way better, to be honest. First of all, your infantry are cheaper in that your baseline for dismounted guys drops to 6 men as your minimum squad size instead of 10, which is huge, right? I mean, that's saving you easily 40 points just off the bat, and it gives a good reason for actually taking dismounted infantry over and against just going with cavalry. Your cavalry costs an extra 1 point per man because they increase the cost of horses generally on infantry. Honestly, I think that's healthy. The cost of cavalry, by the way, for officers went down. It went from 5 points per horse to 3 points per horse. Now horses in general, across all unit types, are 3 points per man, which is very good too. So I think it works out well. And again, I just think if Polish cavalry are going to be as powerful as they are, increasing their cost slightly by increasing the cost of all cavalry slightly is, I think, a perfectly fine way to do it. Your marksman is simultaneously worse, but also better, ironically. He is worse in that he can't just pick out a flamethrower from an infantry squad anymore. He can't just pick out a Panzerfaust from an infantry squad anymore. Can't pick out a light machine gun out of a squad anymore, even though light machine guns got an awful lot better. At the same time, he's a little bit better because he's cheaper than other snipers, and other snipers are not worth their points as a general rule. So, link to the video that you can see somewhere over here or somewhere down there. So on the whole, like, if you're going to take a sniper, and snipers are actually very useful, forward observers can be very powerful in 3rd edition, and so the ability, if you get that first draw, especially now that you don't have communications breakdown anymore, to try to throw it back and maybe give up your first draw. If you get the first draw and you were able to deploy your marksman after your opponent deployed his forward observer, it can be a really good thing for you to be able to then just deploy him where you can see the forward observer, give him the first activation dice, 3s to hit, probably if they're purchasing it regular, which most people are, 3s to wound, no cover save. It's really nice because as far as I can tell, the furthermen that you purchase can't actually call in the strikes. As far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong down below, please do. But if that's the case, I mean, that is a very effective way to shut down an awful lot of strike from one unit in a given turn. It means that, if somebody's running 2, 3, or 4 of these guys, you're not gonna be able to shut them all down, but you can at least shut down more of them than you would be able to do otherwise, which is really good. Your artillery is more expensive from a howitzer perspective, and that sucks because again, that's some of the best long range and anti-tank and penetration values that you get. That being said, the Bofors AA gun is 5 points cheaper. The WZ light auto cannon is 15 points cheaper. So I see a lot of anti-air batteries coming out for Poland in the future as a way of being able to still provide some of that suppression power and some of that penetration power at longer ranges, and then just hopefully it works. The TKS Tankette is 5 points cheaper than it was before. Arguably still just as good, possibly even better, because now you can take more than one of them. And you get a 33 to 40 point inexperienced armored half-track. So if you want to be able to move some men up, including veterans, reliably and easily across the battlefield without them being removed by enemy machine gun fire, you have a relatively easy way to do it. You just pop an officer inside of this armored half-track, put some dudes in there with him, and you're good. And I think that could be really powerful. So what changes would I make? Honestly, I wouldn't do much. First of all, I would re-add the Tashanka. It's not going to dramatically change things. It's a super cheap MMG. Yes, it does potentially create spam armies. That is true. First and foremost, Poland doesn't have a lot of points left over for shenanigans like this after you build out a traditional Polish build. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Second, and more than that, like a horse-drawn carriage takes up a lot of space. I don't know if you've seen the models for these things. They're huge. And on a damage value 3+ vehicle that doesn't get to roll on the damage chart, like it's so easy to remove. If anybody in the game wanted to have a Tashanka, why wouldn't you just give it to them? It's not a problem. So I would do that. But beyond that, honestly, I think the list is fine. You know, you could do some other stuff. You'll see some of my recommendations down below. But I think the rest of the infantry types you could more or less make up for with subtypes. And that's where we're going to go next. Since all of the books so far seem to be pretty strongly built around 3 subtype options for armies, I would do the following for the Poles. First is I would do mountain infantry. This is where you would just pay +1 point for fieldcraft. These guys were mostly active on the southern front, where Poland has a lot of mountainous terrain. Some really good skiing, by the way, in Poland. In case you ever find yourself in Poland, go ahead and check it out. They got some really, really good skiing places. For those of you who don't know, by the way, my wife spent almost 10 years of her childhood in Poland. And so it's got a soft place for both of us in our family's heart, and we intend to go out there sometime soon. If I do pop by, I'll let you guys know, and maybe we can set up some bolt action, because that would be fun. But suffice it to say, the mountain infantry they had on the southern border, extensive experience working through snow, woods, rocky and mountainous terrain, uneven terrain, even maneuvering artillery through those areas. And so I don't have a problem giving a potential +1 point for fieldcraft on mountain infantry. I think that'd be great. Second, we'll have the Ulan infantry. This is their mounted regiments that they had mostly as a holdover from, previous wars, but still continued on into World War II, where I would give them the ability to pay +1 point per man if you're taking the Ulan infantry for an advance move before turn 1 with no ability to shoot afterwards that would also not trigger ambush. So this is very similar to Rangers Lead the Way, except that you're getting an advance order instead of a run order. And that comes with 2 benefits and a couple of disadvantages. So the first benefit is you can move into rough terrain, which means if you had Ulan infantry with that advanced move and they wanted to move into, say, a forest, for example, technically speaking, a U.S. Ranger squad can't do that because they're allowed a run order, but a run is not technically allowed in a forest, right? Because it's rough terrain. It's advance only, technically, with the way the chart's written. I think there's a problem with the chart, as I expressed in my video with Bo Mortensen. But in general, that means this is a big difference between the two. One of them can move into soft cover, the other one cannot. The second reason why I think it might be useful to have an advance order is because while a 12-inch move forward for a regular infantry squad is fine, since the Ulan infantry very possibly are going to be cavalry units, I don't know I necessarily want to give them an 18-inch move. I don't think that's particularly good for the health of the game. But I do think that a 9-inch move still gets you a good bit of versatility without maybe getting way too close and far closer than you should, right? If you're starting roughly 24 inches away from the enemy, more or less, depending on what your scenario is and what your deployment looks like, if you're moving just an extra 9 inches up, it means you might still be a little too far for an enemy maneuvering around and trying to shoot you with some machine guns. Whereas a Ranger squad, very commonly, people think, well, I'm getting all this extra movement. I want to get the most out of it that I possibly can. And when that happens, you end up with problems because sometimes you move up way too far and then the enemy pops out with some machine guns and they start shooting at you. And depending on how you deployed and how they deployed and what the terrain looks like between you guys, they might even end up with point blank shots, admittedly, possibly with you behind cover, like, behind a stone wall or something like that. But point blank range is really not good, right, for what you want to be at. So on the whole, I think an advance order gives enough trade-offs that loss of a couple of inches of movement is going to be fine. Okay. And it still gives you some nice tactical and unique benefits, which is cool. And then finally, the Border Protection Corps. This was centered around the Eastern Front. A lot of Poland's most veteran units were stationed along the Eastern Front. This goes back to the fact that literally like weeks after the Treaty of Versailles and the end of World War I, Poland, Lithuania, Prussia, and Ukraine end up all ganging up together to fight against the Soviet Union, which borders a number of them. And so you end up with this fight that goes on for close to over 10 years. And during that fighting, Prussia gets mostly swallowed up, Lithuania gets swallowed up, Ukraine gets swallowed up. The Poles are right now on the border with the Soviet Union, and they end up signing a peace treaty. But there were still border skirmishes, there were still assaults that were happening, and sometimes there was fighting between the two sides. And then, of course, September 17th, the Soviets reinvade, right, during 1939. So toward that end, because a lot of the veterans were here, they were dug in, they were used to regular skirmishes, they were used to regular fighting. What I would do here is that veterans, so you can't spam this on regulars, but for veterans, you can pay an extra point for a +1 bonus to the unit's cover saves, which would give you some very interesting utility. It means that if you're already in heavy cover and you go down, it doesn't actually help you at all, right? Because you'd already be sitting at a 2+. It wouldn't actually give you any benefit. It does mean that you would do a lot more defending in a forest environment, which is what a lot of these guys were doing, right? And it means that you could decide, well, maybe it's worth it on a 3+ not to go down. And so you can actually still stay up while still potentially not losing nearly as many men. And potentially, if you're running cavalry as part of a border protection corps, you're just negating the -1 penalty to your cover save that you're getting for cavalry. So then the benefit of doing that is that if you were planning on taking a small veteran cavalry section, you can just remember cover saves normally because you get a +1 to cancel out the -1, which means you act like a normal unit, which is useful. So on the whole, it makes your guys pretty expensive. All of these would make them pretty expensive, but they would give you some nice utility benefits that can help you out with your army. In terms of special rules, we're going to rewrite basically most of them because obviously a number of them don't really come up. They come up even less than 3rd edition because Fanatics has changed even more so as we head into the new edition. So we'll keep No Hope of Retreat. Rerolling failed morale test is great. It really kind of shows the fact that a lot of Polish units stuck and fought to the bitter end. Potentially that was not the smartest move. Trading space for time might have been a better strategy, but it is what they did. So we will reward them for that. The next one I would give is aggressive support. Now, we've done a lot with howitzers, and all of them have been different. What I want to reward from Poland, and you can actually see it in the picture there on the other side, Poland overwhelmingly favored putting howitzers directly in line of sight of the enemy. They ran them very far forward. I mean, we want to talk about a forward artillery doctrine for the French, even more so for Poland. And there's a lot of reasons for this. The big one being Poland did not have a lot of radios. And so because of that, while you did have the ability sometimes to call in strikes, not every artillery battery was well designed to do that. And so because of that, you will commonly see medium howitzers, heavy howitzers, light howitzers being used at very, very, very close ranges by the Poles to make up for the fact they really didn't have a lot of AT guns. And while anti-aircraft guns are used quite a bit against infantry in bolt action, they were not heavily used against infantry this early in the war. A lot of them were positioned in such a way that they could help to protect against aircraft, but they were not primarily lowered down and shooting at people like we see in, for example, Saving Private Ryan, right? So to reward the fact that the Poles are using howitzers in a direct fire scenario, and considering that the cost of howitzers has gone through the roof in 3rd edition, I have zero problems at all saying we should give their howitzers a +1 to their to hit roll when firing direct. This means that they would be hitting starting on a 3+, becomes a 4+ if they advance, of course other penalties if they're losing crew or if they have pins. It means that they're going to hit 1 extra time per game, effectively, right? When you look at the math. So on the whole, I think it's fine. It means that if you really, really want to do good indirect fire, you should take somebody like France or Belgium. If you want to be able to get benefits for your infantry, you should be taking something like Romania. And if you want to be able to just use them in a direct fire, shoot down the lane sort of approach, take Poland. And that gives you a good reason to do howitzers differently with everybody. And then finally, we're going to give them a choice between one of the following two. The first is lead from the front. This is where infantry and artillery that start within 6 inches of an officer can roll a d6, and on a 4+, they get to remove a pin. Polish officers were commonly present near the front of the fighting. This did lead to the death of quite a few mid-ranking officers relatively early on in the war, which did cause problems later on. But it was part of the doctrine. The thinking was is that the men need to be given very clear instructions. They need to see that the officers are present and near, and that they hear the men, and that they're with the men in it all. And that's partially why the Poles fought so hard, because from the lowliest man to the highest officer, they were all in it, right? And so we want to represent that by showing that, yes, your infantry and artillery will fight better if they are near an officer, which is great. And then finally, we'll do the cavalry tradition. This is going to be different from the Italian version, and in this case, cavalry just gain fieldcraft. It allows them to treat rough terrain as if it is open terrain. It means that you can actually get some of the swift mobility that we see from, for example, the 21st Vistula Ulan Regiment at the Battle of Mokra on September 1, where they're moving very, very swiftly through heavily dense forested terrain and then suddenly coming upon columns of people as they're advancing toward the town. You can't really do that in bolt action. Not really. And this would allow us to get quite a bit of that, which is awesome. You still can't see through rough terrain, right? That would block line of sight. So you can't charge an enemy that's on the opposite side of a forest. You wouldn't be able to, charge through at an enemy that's on the opposite side of a ruin. But it would allow you to be able to easily move through something like a forest and to be able to treat a linear obstacle when you're charging into people, for example, as open ground, both of which are quite useful. And that's Poland. It's a cool list. It's a small list, and that's partially why it ranks so high on this rating system. Everything that's in this list, if you like light mortars, even including light mortars, really has a place. It's not the most competitive. I would not plan on saying, okay, because I took a Polish list, I'm going to perform really well. That being said, it's a skew list. It's a very asymmetric list. And for people who haven't played against Poland before, which is quite a few players in the universe, by the way, if you haven't played against the Poles before, when you first see their army, it just doesn't feel the same. And when it starts to play, it doesn't feel the same. And I'll be honest, I am not the greatest player ever. I think part of the reason why I got not one, but 2 tournament wins with Poland is because a lot of the people I was playing against had never played against a Polish army before. They hadn't played against, in most cases, they hadn't even played against a cavalry army before. There might have been some theory craft on how to do it, but when they actually saw it on the table and they're playing against somebody who's played a lot of games and gotten in the reps with Poland, I think there was just a lot of, okay, well, now I'm going to castle up in order to be more protected. And that's true. You can castle up, but it also means now that if I'm able to charge and hit and get in, you're blocking your units for returning fire. And so the whole you can't fire at a unit that's within an inch of another one of your units rule kind of comes into play. And so it caused a bunch of issues. It was a whole corralling thing that happened in multiple games that I've played over the years. And so the result is, if you can master this army, which is not easy to do, I think you can perform really well. And that's why I'm not surprised when I see tournaments going on in the UK, tournaments going on in Europe, going on across the world where somebody runs Poland. There's typically only like 1, maybe 2 armies that do. It doesn't surprise me when I see it finishing near the middle or even near the top, because somebody that they hit was not prepared for how to deal with it. So I would recommend, if you're looking for an interesting army, a different army, a fun army just to try, I'd take a look at these guys. I think they're awesome. If you're looking for ideas for painting, I want to say DZ Saber did a Polish army. I'll see if I can track down his video and link it down in the description below. Editor Aaron's also going to take a look. I want to say Dario Studios also did a Polish army. I'm going to take a look at that also to see if I can point that out, because some of the color schemes are just also really good. You get the benefit that you're painting up horses, and horses means you can do all kinds of cool things just to give it a little more extra texture and color, because, horses between socks and hawks and splotches and stuff, like you get all kinds of cool color schemes that you can do with horses to make them all look very different. And that's just kind of fun from a hobbyist perspective, right? Not to mention the fact that it's Poland in September, so you can do an autumn look for your basing materials if you want to. You could still do like, lush green grasses with flowers and stuff like that because those are also still present in Poland in September. So I think you have some really cool and interesting hobby aspects to this that are really great. Not to mention the little cockroach TKS 10 cats are just fantastic. Okay, really fantastic. They look really good. They're small, tiny profile, so it's very easy to get cover. It's very easy to get full obstruction from being shot at if you really want to, which when you have the Recce rule is just fantastic. So it's got some interesting tricks to it, some very interesting tricks to it, and so I will highly recommend that you try it out. But have I been too generous to admittedly my favorite army? I'm honest, I did put them above the Soviet Union. If you want to tear me apart in the comments for that down below, please do. I understand. It's all's fair. It's totally fine. I'm ready for it. Is there something that I didn't talk about that you think is awesome about Poland? I don't know exactly what that is because they didn't really have much for me else to talk about. But, like if there is something else that you think would be worth discussing, let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.